All right. Excellent. Welcome to Making Sense of AI. This webinar is the first part of a five-part series that we're putting together here at Enrollify that focuses on understanding AI and actually taking some actionable steps towards how to implement it in your day-to-day institutions and looking at examples. One of the things that we did with this series is that we released a definite guide to AI, which was a really lengthy document going over a lot of different components of AI. It was very executive driven and executive focused to understand AI, how it benefits and what it is. So that document has been very popular for us, and we had hundreds and hundreds of, even thousands of downloads of that document. And one of the things that we wanted to do is take that document and make it into a five-part series that focuses on AI to answer those questions. Today is the first one of those webinar series. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Artis Kadu. I'm the founder and CEO of Element 451. I'll be the one guiding you through all of these webinar series. And some of them we're going to have guests. But for today, it's just going to be me providing you an overview of AI, what it is, how it works. And of course, we'll take a look at a few other things in here. So to give you a really high level of what we're going to go through and what the series is all about, the first one, it's going to be just orientation, what AI is, making sense of it, and how everything kind of fits together. On the second one, we're going to focus on AI for student experience. So how can we use AI for student experience? What does that look like? What are the areas that we're going to focus on, and so on and so forth. The third one, we're going to take a look at AI for productivity. So for day-to-day work that we're doing in our institutions, that we're doing at work, how can it be a better assistant to amplify the work that we're doing? Webinar number 4 is going to be all about teaching and learning. We're going to have a guest for this one. I'm not an expert in teaching and learning. However, we're going to have a guest in this one to see how AI can be used both from some of the student side and also for curriculum building, program building, how they think about having that in the classroom. And last but not least, number 5, we're going to bring everything together, and we're going to talk about how do you think about having an AI-ready campus, right? How do you set up readiness? How do you get ready for AI? What are the pieces that you need, and how does that work together? So we hope that by the end of this, you're going to have a good understanding on how AI fits into all of these different areas, and take away some insights and take away some actionable items that you can start implementing in your campuses and even with your teams day to day. All right, so I wanted to show you something really interesting and start with this video clip in here.
Do you know what that big announcement is today with the iPod? Does anybody know what that is?
What is it?
I don't know. They're speculating an iPhone, that you're going to be able to talk on the phone with your iPod.
You know what?
Tell us why it's a bad idea. It's like the computer. It'll never take off.
What are you going to do? Carry the phone? You carry the phone over here, carry the iPod over there, carry the thing between your legs? Stop it.
One device. It's the one thing.
It's ridiculous. So many things to carry.
That's the idea. It's one device. It's an iPod and a phone.
No, I don't like it.
When I saw that video for the first time, it made me chuckle quite a bit. The reason why I put this up is because we have a lot of folks that we talk to, and maybe in our day-to-day lives and in our work, we have a lot of Regises in our environment. And obviously you're here because you want to learn more. However, we have naysayers and we have folks that are just stuck with their old ways and says, oh, you know what, this thing is never going to work. So this is the iPhone release in 2007, which is 15 years ago, right? And look where we are today. iPhones and mobile phones are indispensable and become part of our everyday lives, and we can't go anywhere without them. Of course, there's goods and bads to it as well. But just to understanding, it's that the mindset and where we are it's very different. I want to read a quote from Bill Gates, given that he's a visionary and how he thinks about it. This is not the whole quote, but I'm going to pull it from our AI guide. And what he says is that development of AI is fundamental as the creation of the microprocessor, the personal computer, the internet, and the mobile phone. It will change the way people work, learn, travel, get healthcare, and communicate with each other. entire industries will reorient around it. Businesses will distinguish themselves by how they use it. And that's exactly why we're here today, is to understand how we can use it and how we think about AI in our day-to-day lives, and then how we incorporate it in our organizations as well. At Element, and even we've been trying to do a lot of education, and even through Enrollify now, but obviously there's quite a bit to be done there as well. So when we look at then our own institutions, it's, if you think about it, I'm asking a question in this case, it's like, what does your institution think about AI? Like, how does your president or your boss or the organization overall think about AI? A study or some research from MIT Technology Review, essentially, this is not just higher education, but it's a lot of different industries or organizations, and employers think that 98% of them think the impact is going to be it's going to be felt very deeply in business. And of course, as a CEO, I understand how impactful AI is for our organization, and then how it can change a lot of things. However, only 9% have actually adopted AI. So there's a huge disconnect there between realizing as a business and as institutions that AI is actually changing our world. And at the same time, it's like, what do we do to actually get better at it? And what's the holdup? There's actually a couple of things that are really important when we think about adoption of AI. One of them is, where do you start? Identifying the right use cases is number one prohibitor, or number one roadblock that we see every single day. When you ask somebody, give me some use cases, and then we're going to see how to get their workflow, and then think about how we're going to use AI to modify and make that workflow better. Change management is really hard. So where do you start is a much bigger question. Where do you start personally? Where do you start changing a process? Where do you start changing policy? So all of these things are questions that are on top of mind for us. And those use cases are important. Figuring out, starting small, starting with one thing in mind, or just a few initiatives, and then going from there, it's really important. There's a lack of expertise in-house as well. Even though you want to start, that you want to go, you have no idea where to start. There's so much content out there. There's so much noise out there. So everyone is trying to figure it out, and there's no in-house experts. So there's another employee buy-in as well. So when we think about AI, we fear that the job placement. So our employees who are resisting might be coming back and saying, you know what, we don't understand AI. There's a lack of understanding, and then they feel that the jobs are going to be displaced. So it's really hard to implement something when there is no buy-in, and they just don't see the benefit, and they think that is a threat to their jobs rather than a boost to what they're doing and making things better. And last but not least, there's a lot of fear around data privacy. What are you going to do with my data? One of the things that we get asked quite a bit is ChatGPT going to use my data to train their model? And the answer is no, if you have the pro version, or if you are using the APIs. We're not in the really early days anymore. These governance issues have been kind of solved from a provider perspective. However, we still need to worry about that internally from our organizations. And to the companies or even institutions are putting a lot of guardrails around this, right? It's funny because organizations are prohibiting their users from using ChatGPT and blocking it at the level of the organization. Meanwhile, employees are still using it on their phones, right? And you hear this over and over again with startups and even some of the larger organizations. It's this idea that data privacy, we need to make sure that we have that all in place and we understand what it is, and can we trust it? Can we trust that AI? Now, I want to move on and get to the crux of some of the things that why we're here today, right? One of the things is we want to understand it. But this idea of AI, what it is, AI has been around since the 1950s. It was actually coined in the 1950s. So artificial intelligence was first coined by John McCarthy in 1955. And it's really a field of computer science. And it's really a study in how to make computers think like humans, right? The whole idea for AI since the beginning has been, how can we replicate our human brain and how can we make computers think like humans and perceive the world like humans? And it involves building algorithms and building models to understand the world and to go through a reasoning for that world and make decisions. So since the 50s, we've had this inspiration. However, the technology hasn't gotten there. So there's been quite a bit of research until maybe a couple of decades ago, and even a decade ago, when we had our first true deep learning kind of AI moments, when we thought about Watson becoming a Jeopardy champion. And then in 2017, when AlphaGo, developed by Google, beat the Grandmaster in AlphaGo, right? So that was one of the true kind of moments that AI it's not just a toy, right? But now it's actually something useful. So if you want to think about it, the field has been around for a long time. And when you think about what it is, it's this idea that we're feeding these computers a lot of data and they're finding patterns in that data, right? So they're finding patterns, and those are what those models are. So in this case, what I'm showing you here is that everything gets digitized. So everything around our world, we're trying to digitize it. And the audio that we're talking about right now, it's all digitized. Think about the different types of trees, like you build information around that. Your fingerprint is digitized as you touch your iPhone, for example. Your face, your image because of your iPhone, your barcodes, your handwriting. So all of these things are digitized and they're represented in the same way: images, video, audio. And to the computer, they're all numbers, right? At the end, they're all numbers. And that's the beauty of this, is because then we can build these computers that are basically computing and going through and figuring out how to derive patterns out of these representations of the real world, right? In order to understand it better. So we're giving it data about the real world, either through text, images, audio, video, and so on and so forth. And then we're digitizing that and we're finding patterns. And in order to do that, we go like we build this really large model. So when we talk about models, like an AI model is really just a computer program that analyzes all of these large data sets to find those patterns and eventually make predictions. When you hear AI, you're going to hear models quite a bit. You're going to hear large language models, you're going to hear multimodal models, you're going to hear predictive modeling. So modeling is just a representation, again, the representation of the training that's done on the data set in order to have a view of the world that data provided, to find patterns in that particular data. We have two different types of models. We have predictive models and generative models. And today we're going to be talking about both of them, because when we think about AI, we need to understand that predictive models have been around for quite a bit, right? A little bit longer. And generative AI has had its moment very recently with ChatGPT, but predictive models have been around for a while. So when you think about a predictive model, it's essentially a statistical model that basically goes through the historical data, and then it finds the patterns in that data, and then it can make predictions about a number of things in the future, right? So depending on what data it was trained with, it can do things like forecasting, it can do product recommendations or fraud detection if it's trained with data from your credit card information. So in higher ed, we also use predictive modeling for things like enrollment or at-risk students. So that's something that we use quite a bit. But the level and the amount of data that we feed those models is very small in higher education, right? It's very tiny. When you think about these large language models, they're very different, right? Or some of the large predictive models, they're very big. And we can take a look at that. So here's some examples of how you think about what these predictive models are. So iPhone Face ID. Essentially what it's doing, a Face ID, is a use case of AI that's using a predictive model to take an image of your face or to take whatever data points it is, create a representation of that. And then based on the model that it's using, it's saying, yes, this is artist, or no, this is not artist. So it's doing it's doing a prediction based on all these data points that it received. It's making a decision on that and making a prediction on it, on that data based on what it was trained with. So that's a use case that we use every single day, right? You don't even think about it, but when you raise your phone to your face, it's actually grabbing that picture and it's doing that detection every single day for you. Another one, which is one of my favorite use cases of predictive, is around personalization, right? So a lot of us are very behavioral driven, and we've been talking about behavior at Element for a number of years. We actually started a lot of our work around behavioral modeling and behavioral driven predictive intelligence. But this is around personalization. So think about Amazon and how Amazon knows when you need a certain thing, and then it puts it in your cart automatically, or it actually shows it. Advertising is all about recommendations. Netflix uses those recommendations in a very interesting way to showcase a show. But in this case, what they have 10 or 20, 30 different versions of the poster image, and they actually show you the one that you're more likely to open it up because they have different characteristics, right? They have faces in there versus intrigue versus they have a wider shot. So depending on what kind of movies, what kind of history you have with then you're more likely to view that. So this is a really great way of personalization. If you think about that in higher ed and in our marketing efforts, we can do some of that with our images when we send communications out and we start thinking about different campaigns as well. So this is another example of prediction, and this is Tesla self-driving. And to the left, you have basically all of the steering wheel turning by itself, and that's actually the prediction. It's turn right, turn left, slow down. Those are predictions that are being made by the model. And then on the right, you see what the model sees, right? So all the input comes in, it detects all of the environment, it detects all the different objects because it has all those patterns from before, right? So it's making predictions. This is a person, this is a tree, this is a road. So it's making all these different calculations very fast, and then you're able to drive with it as well. So I wanted to show this because this is a great example of predictive and deep learning AI that's being used today to benefit our day-to-day lives. Self-driving cars is an area where I hope we can get there a lot faster. Self-driving cars are an order of magnitude safer than human drivers, right? But it's going to take us a little bit of time, and this is accelerating. Now, those are predictive models, right? So there's a lot more. You can think about it as like your fraud detection and so on, like fraud detection for your credit cards that is looking at every transaction. When you think about generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence. So now, rather than predicting that this is a tree or a house or whatever, it actually synthesizes an actual tree or a person out of thin air, right? So basically, based on the data that you give it, it has an understanding of the world, and it's generating imagery based on a prompt or based on an input. So think about it, how your actual brain works, right? When somebody says cat, the cat that you're thinking about is very different than the cat that I'm thinking about, because there is no ideal version of a cat. The cat is a cat, and now you can start describing into more detail, and you can get something very specific. You can think about a tropical island, and that looks very different to you. But what we're doing is we're thinking about those, and we're creating those images, right? We're creating those images in our mind based on the models that we have around a tropical island. We probably saw, or somebody described it to us, what it looks like. So we're making all these connections. And that's what generative AI is all about as well, right? It has a model of the world with all the data that is trained. And then when you ask it a question or you provide some input, it's going to react and then hallucinate to give you an output of that back, right? So generative AI is obviously the key moment for it is when ChatGPT was introduced a year ago, but that's one of the products, right? But then, of course, you have Bard and Claude as well. So that's probably where you've seen and how you're using generative AI the most, right? ChatGPT had its first birthday literally last week, November 30th, I think. So it's only been a year, right? It's only been a year since ChatGPT was available. And look how fast and how far we've come with understanding or even using some of those tools and techniques and generating text. It's become so easy now. So here's an example of imagery that we've generated an element, and these are campus shots, right? Now these, if I were to tell you that these weren't real people, you'd be like, no, they look really pretty real, right? But they're actually generated. And what we did here is that we needed to, for example, for this first image, we needed to illustrate that we needed a multi-generational group of people. So you can represent undergraduate, graduate, alumni, family members, and be diverse as well. So the model was able to put that together for us here, very similar, where the diversity comes through, but it looks very real, right? The high quality, it's very real. And the reason why I mention this is because we use this for our booth and on a conference. And to be honest, there's very few people, even though we put AI generated on some of the images, we were told, and people came up, and unless we pointed it out, they thought it was images that were real images. So here's another way that we might have gone in and done a large photo shoot with people or taken stock images from somewhere, but we actually generated, we knew exactly what we wanted. We added the orange color shirts. Those prompts we can probably share them at some point, but that's one of the ways that we thought about it. Generation doesn't have to be just images or text, right? So if you're training it with material science data, it's able to synthesize, it's able to come up with novel ideas around whatever that training data that you have it. So in this case, Google DeepMind, as of earlier this week, they introduced 400,000 new compounds. So these are materials to the Berkeley large database. And what that means is that we're now able to create new materials that can be things like find superconductors or find really hard materials that we weren't able to even imagine before. But because the AI and these computers can actually run all of the possible opportunities for that, now we can get these models that makes a lot of sense, right? Because they have extracted what the patterns are for kind of materials, and they're able to create new ones. So it would have taken us in research labs for a really long time. So the other use case is in code. Writing code nowadays, becoming a programmer is, I have no idea what's going to happen to a lot of the, I would say, programmers, but developers in the next 5 years, because these models are so good at writing code. Code is very structured and it's very pattern based. There's actually libraries that are built all around patterns. Things like, for example, when your libraries that build on Python or whatever, like you have all these patterns and libraries. Large language models can generate code very easily, right? Because you can just tell it, give it a particular type or something, and then it can generate that code very easily. So it's another area where generating code and then running it becomes something that's very important, and we'll take a look at that in the future as well. One of the things that I like to say it's really important is that the most powerful language for working with data, and this is from a different presentation, but for working with data is not Python or SQL, it's English now. So you don't need Python or SQL because the models or the AI will actually write that underneath. All you have to do is understand and give it English instructions. So the most powerful language that we have today is English. So as long as we're able to describe those in English, we're in a good spot. Now, I did a little experiment here where I was able to use an example of accessibility, right? So Meta does a lot of really great work and they produce a lot of models for communications. So things like translation and dubbing and things like that. So they have some of the best models out there and they're open source. So they have a great demo here. So when I did this, I'm like, geez, how do you take a person and then now you start to dub them into a different language, which is very expressive. So here's an example of how Meta did with that, or how this model, the seamless model, did with it. Let me play it for you. Making Sense of Artificial Intelligence. It's a 5-part webinar series taking you on a journey from theory to practice. Making Sense of Artificial Intelligence. C'est une série de webinaires en 5 parties qui vous emmène dans un voyage de la théorie à la pratique. I sent that to my wife actually last night as I was producing it, and she was like, holy shit, this is really good. It actually sounds like you. The point here is that we are now in a place where the synthesis of this models, what they're able to produce, is a lot better and it's really good. And this goes to accessibility, right? So imagine now you can have a message to your students, or you can have courses or video material that is expressive in multiple languages in real time, right? So you can deliver all this stuff in real time. No longer do you have to think about, oh, I need translators now to take this website and translate it. No, those are actually done in real time because you can move from one language to another. Now, when you think about generative AI and how it's going to affect the economy, we look at those models and it's, oh, wow, I don't need any voiceover artists anymore because all I have to do is synthesize all that audio. And now I have really good expressive audio. And the answer is, yeah, probably. Yeah, we ourselves are using those synthesized audio for different languages, not necessarily different languages, but for certain material that we don't really need a voiceover person. What does that mean? Does it mean that, like, Regis, for example, said, no, this is not for me? However, the cell phone industry and the internet enabled us to generate so much more value in the economy, right? So much more value was released when mobile phones became more and more popular, and now they're everywhere. Same thing with the internet. Somebody was actually typing before email, somebody was actually typing inter-office memos, and that was their whole job, right? And I'm sure they thought, oh shit, my job is going to go away. What happens now? So now switching that back to AI is the same type of questions that are happening, right? It's like, where is generative AI going to be impactful in businesses, and where's the potential? And when you look in here, is that sales, marketing, those areas where you're producing content and you're generating content that's pretty formulaic, it's going to be an area where we can now very fast gain access to this model, gain access to this AI, and produce that content very quickly in those areas and gain a lot of value from it. But of course, you can see the numbers here. Software engineering is up there with all the writing of the code, customer operations, think about student support. We're going to talk about that later. Product R&D, research and development. So the R&D now, research and development, can be happen a lot faster because the work can be done and can be modeled a lot faster there. 4.4 trillion in global economy. And these numbers have probably gone up since the McKinsey report was published a couple of months ago. When we switch to higher education now, and that's what we're going to be focusing over the next few sessions, is like how we're going to take generative AI or AI in general, and how do we look at the experiences, these 3 different areas, like the student experience, productivity, and teaching and learning. How we're going to look at those areas and where are the opportunities for AI in each one of those different areas. When you think about the student experience, you're not unique in the sense that you're providing a service, you're providing customer service essentially to your students, but there's a lot of other things in there, marketing and so on and so forth. So when we look at that, one of the, we're going to go very quickly here and look at a broad level and then go a little more detail through the other webinars, right? This is the whole point of this first introductory webinars, to level set you, and then we'll go deeper with examples in the other webinars. So thinking about the student experience, the first thing that you can think about is 24/7 support with chatbots and AI chatbots. It's the number one thing that you can do for your students is provide that support. And this AI has gotten really good and conversational. So that's a huge opportunity there to remove the barrier of getting to a person in a particular point in time. Now they can get to all the knowledge that you have, and they can answer any question any time of the day in any language with this AI chatbot. So that's a huge opportunity for how you can provide better service to your students. Hyper-personalized marketing is another one. We saw how Netflix does it, but can we actually use the same capabilities to now generate content on the fly that is personal to that student before we even need to, when we send them messages? Can we personalize it based on what we know about them? That's another area in marketing and personalization that we can now become much more effective, where AI allows us to do that. Proactive outreach. Now, this falls into more of that predicting component of it, but how do you actually reach out to somebody before they need you, right? It's like, how do you proactively do that? And that's another area when you think about student experience. So pulling this all together, we're going to focus in kind of use cases for each one of these, and how to think about experience, and some use cases on where you get started, and look at examples as well. When you think about productivity, there's so much around productivity, because you can have productivity in a lot of different areas. But when you boil it down, there is a few areas that become like, from an employee perspective, becomes interesting. One of them is content generation. We're knowledge workers, and we're producing content and writing emails and doing communications and producing briefs and synthesizing information. So content generation is super easy and within our reach to use AI, and become a very easy use case for us to do. Now there's different, like you have to be good at certain things, because you have to prompt the model, or you have to prompt this AI the right way. That's getting a lot better in order to get really good content. Some of you might have used ChatGPT or other tools and said, no, it just doesn't do what I want it to do. But maybe that's not the barrier, right? It's that you need to learn a little bit more. You need to learn that coding language, the English coding language, to work with the AI and make sure that prompting is correct. This idea of knowledge discovery, right? We need information all the time. We need to know when something is happening. I need to work with finance to understand what's a policy. I need to work with student affairs. I need to work with admissions. I need to work with our provost to see what the requirements that changed for this program. So how do you keep that knowledge base and all that information in one place so it becomes accessible to all the organization? You unlock so much productivity by making all that information available. So knowledge discovery, since the beginning of digitization and the beginning of organizations, it's always been about knowledge sharing, and how do you very quickly find, and everybody finds it in the right places. Search used to be it, knowledge bases and all this, but this AI and generative AI has a much bigger potential there. Actionable insight is another one where you're bringing data and you're asking your data questions. We used to be that predictive modeling was all the rage, and we just didn't know what to do with it. We're getting all the data, but we have no content. So I'm going to move quickly through. We can go deeper, but we're going to try to do that during our next session. When you think about teaching and learning, again, it's all about content generation, right? How are you producing content material for teaching and learning? How are you personalizing that learning to that particular student? Like, you can use it for grading, or you can use it for providing different examples, and AI tutors as well. AI tutors are becoming within our reach, right? With the ideal of every student having their own tutor, or their own AI tutor, so to speak. Now it's also possible. Everybody learns a little bit differently, and they need to be encouraged a little bit differently. So how do you encode the knowledge within the AI tutor and then distribute that knowledge in their own perspective, in their own kind of timeline? And then when we think about now what's next, right? It's okay, we talk a lot about these areas, but you probably have heard things like, oh, the doom and gloom of AI and where things are going. We are now in a very interesting place where AI has been very useful to us, and where we are today has only been about perception. So remember, the goal of AI was to mimic how humans think and how we're able to make decisions based on that thinking. Right now, we've only been able to get to a place where we're actually perceiving the world, right? How do we perceive the world? Like, we're not able to make those decisions yet. And one person who put this really nicely last week at one of the conferences, it's the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang. He's a brilliant guy. He built NVIDIA from the ground up, $1 trillion plus company right now. He saw the AI wave coming a mile away. And if you have stock in NVIDIA, kudos to you for kind of thinking that way ahead.
What we can do today with these models and intelligence are related but not the same. We're very good at perception today, and we're very good at those one-shot knee-jerk reaction. I recognize that's a dog. I can finish that sentence. But there's a whole bunch of things that we can't do yet. We can't reason yet. This multi-step reasoning that humans are very good at, AI can't do.
And how far away do you think we are from that?
We'll see. We'll see. I think that just about everybody's working on it. And all the researchers are working on it. Everybody's working on it. We're trying to figure out, how do you take a goal, break it down into a whole bunch of steps, and create a decision tree, and then walk down the decision tree to figure out which one of the paths leads to the most optimal answer. This is how we reason through things, how we iterate through a problem. Today, as you know...
But you're making bets now in terms of technology that you have to build and investments you have to make.
Yeah.
On where we're going to be 5 years from now.
10 years from now.
10 years from now.
Yeah, right.
People talk about AGI.
Yeah.
Right? Artificial General Intelligence.
Yeah.
Do you think in 10 years from now we are there?
Depending on how you define it, I think the answer is yes. And so the question is, what is AGI? If we define AGI as a piece of software, a computer that can take a whole bunch of tests, and these tests reflect basic intelligence, and by completing those tests, deliver results that are fairly competitive to a normal human, I would say that within the next 5 years, you're going to see, obviously, AIs that can achieve those tests.
And design the chip.
So this is very interesting. And obviously, Jensen is a lot smarter than I am, and has a lot more insight around what's coming around the corner because he's designing these chips, and NVIDIA is powering all of these models that are being produced right now. So when he predicts artificial general intelligence, that's the ability for the reasoning part to happen, right? So right now we're in the world where with synthesizing data, we're understanding the world. These models can understand that. They can do a really good way of mimicking it, but they're not able to reason yet. They can't go through that decision tree, and they can't reason about. So with that, I think that's the last of my slides. Thank you so much for staying over the last 45 minutes. I'm going to open it up for question and answer. This webinar series is part of the Enrollify network, and we are really glad to bring you these webinars so you have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about AI, dive into it, and bring them to your campuses as necessary. So I'm going to open it up for Q&A. There's been a couple of questions that have come in. So one of the questions was, are we required to include a disclaimer on images to indicate that they're generated via AI? Is copyrighted imagery potentially used in generating AI imagery? The answer is you don't need to do that. You don't need to say that this is coming. Obviously, attribution is important in a lot of different places. So when we use it, like we technically put what the prompt was that we're using. That's become a really easy thing in digital places, for example, in digital areas. It's not copyrighted. This is a brand new, purely imagined image. So those pixels never existed before in that combination. And there's the fight over copyright, and then generative AI is going to go on for a really long time. But however, large companies who have made their bets on producing these models, they are providing assistance, and they're saying if somebody sues you for copyright, we're going to cover the cost because we believe that this is like we're trying to protect you, right? And around adoption. So that's a really interesting way how it's the 30-day money back guarantee kind of reassurance, so to speak, right? Where the consumer doesn't fear that something is going to happen. And the only way to reassure them is, don't worry, the worst that can happen is you get sued, but we'll cover all your fees. So there's nothing to worry about. My personal belief is that we're going to fight copyright stuff for a really long time to come. And we don't really worry about that as individual consumers or even institutional consumers of AI right now. All right, let's see. Oh, I see one more question. Where do you think a university should start with integrating AI? So this is a really interesting question, and we're going to try to address it throughout this webinar series, most likely at the end of it. But the first place that you should look at is areas where work is being done right now that can very easily be replaced by AI. So think about the areas that make the biggest impact in a university. We talked about experience, the student experience. How can you make the biggest impact in the student experience that's going to give you the most return? One of the things is that chatbot is a really good way to start thinking about it. We had a school that implemented a next generation chatbot, and they were able to they were able to respond. The bot was able to resolve 79% of the questions and the inquiries that came in. And it didn't matter. It was all times of the day, all times of the year. Some of them were in different languages. So now imagine that, right? 79% of them, they got responses right away and they got what they needed. Now, if you think about like all of the inquiries that are coming in or all of the questions that are coming in, you're probably not able to respond to them a lot faster. So that would start there. Think about how you can make that a priority for your institution. The other area that would be really interesting is around content production. How can you use some of the tools like ChatGPT to essentially automate some of your daily works? This is personal productivity. I'm not talking about necessarily institutional productivity, but institutional productivity should be around things like content production for different departments or teaching and learning. We'll talk more about that in the future as well. So I'll stop there. How do you suggest a younger tech-focused admissions staff leverage the importance of AI to senior leadership? The Regis of college admissions. I knew that was going to be a good one. So it's very hard, right? Because everybody thinks change is hard and change management is really hard. I don't have any specific advice. You have a lot of the industry or everyone else that is helping us move, or you have this wind behind your back, so to speak, saying that AI is really important. AI is really important. So the first thing that I would do is think about how can you have a conversation with them to understand what are the areas that, or what are the things that are important to them, and then understand and then do some proof of concept ways, right? So that's an area where you can maybe come together and say, okay, if we can solve this problem with using AI or automation or whatever it is, having that conversation, I think would be a great start for that. All right. What type of learning or classes are students in school learning about AI today? Are they producing a new talent pool of AI coding? Or will there be a BA in AI? So this is very interesting. And this is an area where it's moving really fast and programs are not being developed to learn AI. So right now it's a lot of tools, but there's certain things that are important, like prompt engineering, for example. How do you write English to prompt the AI to do things a certain way? Because that's also evolving quickly, it might be useful for the next 5 years or for the next couple of years. So you don't really build a program around that. So there's a lot of, for example, I last week I published my prompt engineering course for higher ed marketers on Enrollify. So if you want to go check that out, but that's an area where you can do that. there is no such thing as having a BA in AI. It's like saying having a BA in internet. So it's like, it's going to be the same equivalent thing. So AI is going to be throughout everything that we do. And as I talked about it, it's just an area of computer science, and how you apply it to different use cases varies, and it's different. So think about the internet again, like that comes to mind. It's like now it's really crazy. Like you actually had a person, an IT person, or you have people dedicated to certain things around the internet, but now you don't have that anymore, right? It's ubiquitous. It's so easy to use. It's everywhere. It's just a utility, but it's just the use cases that you use for it. So there's going to be really new needs around AI that are going to be specific, domain specific, rather than generalized programming around it. So that's my prediction. But again, I'm pretty sure that there's going to be programs that are generalized AI, but that's more on how do you build these models, right? That can be one way to think about it, rather than the use of, like, how do I use AI, right? That's a little bit different, right? And right now, computer scientists, those are the ones who are building these large models, and they're actually very lucrative. Like being in that industry right now, you can name your own price in terms of the salaries. All right, I think we are good to go. I don't see any more questions. Hopefully, this session was informative. Our next session is going to be next week, next Wednesday, and it's going to be part 2 on December 13th at 1 p.m. Same time as today, but next week. We're going to focus on student experience, right? How do you think about student experience? And we'll take a look at those bots. We'll take a look at some of the optimizations in terms of the personalization and so on and so forth. And then we're going to take a break, and we will have a few more, 3 more in January. Keep an eye open, go to our website and take a look at them there. And hopefully, I hope to see you there. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming again. And I appreciate you taking the time and out of your day to attend this.